Welcome to this afternoon's session on our first day of conferences. This is a really great opportunity for us to talk to artist and performer Ramesh Meyyappan. We have Catherine as our BSL interpreter today. But this is your chance to ask Ramesh questions about his new piece. It's a dark comedic visual theatre production, and it's called OFF-KILTER. So I'd like to welcome Ramesh to the session. Ramesh, I really wanted to just know more about the inspiration for this piece of work. Could you tell us a little bit about how it came into existence?
Of course, yes. Mental health is something that's often stigmatized and overlooked in society. We're often a little afraid of it, or we tend to shun it. Many people don't disclose a mental illness or any kind of issue with their mental health. Many people tend to keep that very much to themselves. And many of us don't cope particularly well on any given day. And holding that in is kind of leads to not just loneliness, but isolation. And it was that kind of starting point that put me into this process. I wanted to try and unpack that process, that thing that happens to people when they're having a little bit of a struggle. When everyone has an off day, it doesn't have to be a long-term illness. Everyone has an off day. Just human beings have those days where nothing works, nothing goes right, we don't feel right. And I wanted to have a much more open conversation about that. And so that was where I started the exploration. I know that we see representations of mental illness in lots of art situations in the art world. They tend to be quite heavy, quite dark, quite sad things. And my take on that was, what if I took it into the visual field and added some of the elements of the visual theatre pantheon, which is something like illusion, which is what I added in here. So it wasn't just about tricking people with magic. It was also about sleight of hand that plays with your mind, that draws an audience in, confuses them, and because I didn't know anything about magic at all. What I did was I got in an illusionist called Kevin McMahon. So Kevin and I worked together, and he trained me in the illusions that we decided to put into the show. He's also a semi-finalist in the Britain's Got Talent at the moment, Kevin. So you'll see him. He's a semi-finalist there just now. So well done to Kevin. But he was the person who came in and worked and collaborated with me and taught me a lot about illusion and magic. He's not a theatre maker himself, and I am, but I'm not a magician, and he is. So we worked in these complementary fields to work together to create something. And I didn't want to have great big magic tricks. So over the course of our time together, we sort of processed them right down to less magic and more sleight of hand. That was where we ended up. And that seemed absolutely right for the character of Joe Kilter, this man who's carrying all this baggage and who is pulling all this stuff out of himself that he doesn't understand and doesn't know it's there.
That really touches on something else we spoke about, and that is who else is involved, who's part of this team to put this together with you, Ramesh. Can you tell us a little bit more about the production? So you talked about lighting and how movement has become your music. Tell us a little bit more about what else makes up the show and that performance.
Of course, there are lots of elements, and you need a creative team around about you, So it is a one-man show, but there are lots and lots of people. I had lighting design, choreographer, sound designer. I had a director, the artistic director of the Tron Theatre in Glasgow, Andy Arnold, was the director of the piece. I had a producer, a production manager, and I'm the only deaf person in that sea of hearing people, And so I worked very closely with certain interpreters, and what we had to do was find a way to take ideas from the deaf world of me that I inhabit and the hearing world that they inhabit, and find a way to put those together. I tend to work from fragments of thoughts, fragments of ideas that I write up, and then take those into the rehearsal room and experiment with them, play with them, and devise with them. I'm primarily a physical and visual theatre maker, and so we work together with that premise. And in terms of, for example, a soundscape, that's not something that I can put together. You know, I am deaf. I don't access music. So I make sure that I have a sound designer who understands the mood I'm trying to create, who works with me to create that mood. But for me, I think lighting is a much more immediate and accessible form. And so I have very exciting conversations with lighting designers as well. I always struggle to really engage with the soundscape, but what I do is I get someone that I absolutely trust and who is able to collaborate very, very well with me. And I then give that, also make sure that the director has responsibility for that as well. If I'm the director, then I do much more with the sound designer. You know, I work much more closely with them. But I also try to make sure that the designers, because these are creative people, that they have that freedom of expression themselves.
One of the interesting things that you talked about in the film is that you're really keen for this piece of work to tour. So it's going to be going to different venues and different spaces and to different audiences, but not just here in the UK. You're looking to tour worldwide. And I just wonder whether, having done that before, having taken a piece of work to other cultures and other settings, whether is there something that you really enjoy about the response from audiences from different cultures and different, what is it in particular that makes a piece of work travel so well and into different cultures and different spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what I try to do in all my work is universal themes. I try to search out universal themes that will work no matter where I am in the world, and also no matter what kind of audience is in the room. So my ambition is always to have different cultures, different communities, different whether they're deaf, whether they're hearing, it doesn't really matter. What I'm trying to do is offer a show that is wide open to everyone to explore these universal themes. And what's really interesting is that some countries, when I go to visit them, some countries have never seen visual theatre ever before. It's the first time that they encounter visual or physical theatre, that they're used to lots and lots of spoken text on a stage. And that's usually at that point when they kind of say, well, you're deaf, how are you doing this? And we don't really have an awful lot of deaf artists who are touring the world. And there aren't that many deaf theatre makers. We're there, you know, we are there, but theatre tends to be made from a very hearing perspective. And so audiences sometimes are intrigued by that and attracted by that, and sometimes confused by that. But we toured this play to Singapore, which is very different in terms of its audience to the UK. Singapore has a real sort of omerta around talking about mental health. It's just an absolutely taboo subject. And so the audience were quite confused about Off-Kilter. They couldn't quite figure out why I was talking about mental health. And it made you realise how open the UK is actually about discussing that subject. But the Singaporean audiences were a bit sort of, not just bamboozled, but kind of, they didn't really care much about it, you know, about the subject. And one white American person in the audience at the Q&A put their hand up and said, thanks, that was a wonderful piece of work. That resonated with me because I've been through mental ill health myself. And the Singaporean audience, a very local Singaporean audience, just looked in horror, absolute shock at this person for disclosing such a thing publicly.
Yeah.
But this white American person was just really open and said, absolutely, this is how it feels to have this time of feeling off. And that generated a real conversation in the room about mental health. So it was it's fascinating to see how other cultures react.
It's really interesting. We've got a question from Tom, and he says, this feels like a show that would really benefit from a post-show Q&A afterwards. So that touches on what you've just said. Is that the sort of thing you've done elsewhere?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I always have a Q&A. Yeah, absolutely.
And a question from Sarah was,
what I would love to do is, what I always love to do is we do the show and I love to meet the audience. I want to know who they are. I want to talk to them.
And I think that's something that's quite unique to rural touring as well, that it's talked about earlier today, that as a performer, you can't just go on stage and perform and go home. The audience are there to talk to you and pick it apart and find out more about it. We've got a question from Sarah.
And sorry, that's exactly right. You can't just go home. Exactly right. Yeah.
Sarah says, Ramesh, do you tour with a signer?
No. When I tour, well, I'm going to go back on that. I mean, that's budget dependent, really. But every country has its own sign language, so I use whichever interpreter is available to me in that country. And because I'm touring internationally, that has to be something I think about.
We haven't got much time left, but I think one of the things that came up earlier this morning in Amanda Parker's talk and during the panel discussion was about us putting the question out to everyone and anyone at every opportunity, and that is, how do we make you more welcome in our space? So if we are going to welcome you into our venue, Ramesh, what is the best way of making you feel welcome? That might be your favourite snacks. It might be time on your own before the performance. What is it that's unique to you to being made to feel very welcome in a space?
I think for a venue, for a venue to be friendly, to be user friendly is the thing for me. And for me, if someone knows some sign language in the venue, that's always really great. Even if it's a tiny little bit, it doesn't matter. Someone who's willing to say, oh, the cafe's over there, or hello, how are you in BSL, that would be amazing. And that tells me then that when the deaf audience come, if a venue offers an interpreting service, when a deaf person is coming, that feels really important to me. That makes them a welcoming venue to me, because hearing people can walk into any theatre, to any box office and buy a ticket, and that's not the reality or the lived experience of deaf people. So when they walk into a box office and someone can sign with them and communicate with them in sign, and staff know even just a little bit of sign language, that's a huge bonus. And that for me encourages an audience that is more diverse. So that kind of user-friendly venue is the one that I always like.
I think that's a fantastic way to end our Q&A. So thank you so much, Ramesh, for joining us today. We wish you good luck with the tour next year. I hope that it'll come to Devon so that I can see it. Otherwise, I'll find you and come to see the show elsewhere on the tour. And thank you today, Catherine, for helping us today.